Spring Boot, configure, and use 2 data sources. Here is your same structured beginner-friendly content for configure and use 2 data sources in Spring Boot. Intermediate, advanced level, multi-database setup, introduction. In many real-world applications built with Spring Boot, a single database is not enough. You may need multiple databases, separate read-write databases, microservices integration, legacy plus new system integration. This leads to the requirement: configure and use multiple data sources. The most common case: using 2 data sources in one Spring Boot application. Understanding this helps you learn advanced Spring Boot configuration, multi-database architecture, transaction management, JPA configuration per data source. What is a data source? A data source is an object that provides database connections. In simple terms, data source equals configuration plus connection to a database. Why use 2 data sources? You may need multiple databases when working with multiple schemas, separating read-write workloads, integrating legacy systems, using different DB types, MySQL plus PostgreSQL, microservices interacting with different DBs. Example concept: app means DB1, users. App means DB2, orders. Default behavior, single data source. By default, Spring Boot auto-configures. One data source means one entity manager, means one transaction manager, multi-data source requirement. With 2 data sources, you must configure 2 data sources, 2 entity manager factories, 2 transaction managers, repository separation. Example concept: DS1 means EM1 means TM1. DS2 means EM2 means TM2. Step 1. Define properties in application.yml. Example: Spring data source, primary URL, JDBC MySQL localhost 3306 DB1. Username root, password secret, driver class name com.mysql.cj.jdbc.driver. Secondary URL, JDBC MySQL localhost.com/db2. Username root, password secret, driver class name com.mysql.cj.jdbc driver. Example concept: separate config means separate databases. Step 2. Configure primary data source. At configuration, at enable transaction management, at enable JPA repositories, base packages equals com.example.primary.repo, entity manager factory ref equals primary entity manager, transaction manager ref equals primary transaction manager. Primary data source config. Bean, primary, configuration properties, prefix Spring data source primary, public data source primary data source. Return datasource builder.create.build, bean. At primary, public local container entity manager factory bean, primary entity manager factory builder. Return builder data source primary data source. Packages com example primary.entity, persistence unit primary. Bean, at primary, public platform transaction manager primary transaction manager. At qualifier, primary entity manager factory EMF. Return new JPA transaction manager, EMF. Step 3. Configure secondary data source. At configuration, at enable JPA repositories, base packages is com example.secondary.repo. Entity manager factory ref, secondary entity manager, transaction manager ref, secondary transaction manager, public class secondary data source config. Bean, at configuration properties, prefix equals Spring data source secondary, public data source secondary data source. Return datasource builder.create, build. Bean, public local container entity manager factory bean, secondary entity manager factory builder. Return builder data source, secondary data source, packages, com.example.secondary.entity. Persistence unit, secondary, build. At bean, public platform transaction manager, secondary transaction manager. At qualifier, secondary entity manager factory EMF. Return new JPA transaction manager, EMF. Step 4. Separate entities and repositories. Primary, com.example.primary.entity, com.example.primary.repo. Secondary, com.example.secondary.entity, com.example.secondary.repo. Example concept. Separate packages means separate DB mapping. Step 5. Using repositories. Spring automatically maps. Primary repositories means primary data source. Secondary repositories means secondary data source. Example. Autopottered, private user repository uses primary DB. At AutoPride, private order repository uses secondary DB transaction management. Each
Data source has its own transaction manager.
example. At transactional, primary transaction manager, public void save user repository.save user. At transactional, secondary transaction manager, public void save order repository.save order. Example concept. Each DB means its own transaction control. Why at primary is important. At primary tells Spring default data source equals primary. Without it, Spring may get confused when injecting beans. Common architecture pattern. User DB means MySQL. Order DB means PostgreSQL. Example use case scenario. User data means DB1. Order data means DB2. Flow user service means DB1. Order service means DB2. Not applicable directly, but performance considerations. 2 DB connections, separate transaction overhead. Advantages. Advantages include separation of concerns, scalability, flexibility, supports complex architectures. Example concept. Multiple DBs means better system design limitations. Challenges include complex configuration, harder debugging transaction management complexity, no automatic cross-DB transactions. Example concept. More power means more complexity. Common mistakes, not using at primary. Causes ambiguity errors. Mixing entity packages. Wrong data source mapping. Using same transaction manager everywhere. Leads to runtime issues. Forgetting repository separation. Spring cannot map correctly. Example concept. Wrong config means wrong DB usage. Advanced topic, distributed transactions. If you need transactions across multiple DBs, use JTA, Java Transaction API, tools like Atomicos or Narayana. Example concept. Multiple DBs means distributed transaction required, concepts learned. Multi-data source configuration. JPA setup for multiple DBs. Entity separation. Transaction management. Advanced Spring Boot configuration. Simple definition. 2 data sources in Spring Boot. Configuring and using multiple database connections within a single Spring Boot application. Final summary. To configure 2 data sources in Spring Boot, you must define separate data source properties, create 2 data source beans, configure 2 entity managers, configure 2 transaction managers, separate entities and repositories. This setup allows your application to interact with multiple databases efficiently. Understanding this concept is essential for building scalable, enterprise-level Spring Boot applications.